Said he'll be tough enough anyway. Oh, is that what he said?
He said it'll be. Oh.
Robert gonna be here tonight.
I don't know. He didn't call me. I'll bet he shows up because it's not like him to not call and not show. Okay, guys, we're ready to start the workshop. So whoever wants to begin first, just head on up to the mic.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Being as the topic was nuisances in general, I figured that we'd start off by just kind of giving you a little bit of information of where we're at and some of the challenges we're having on the law enforcement side of things. And then Ken's here to answer questions you might have on more the building code side of things. So I'm going to start off just by giving you a 36,000 foot view of the police department. Okay, and these are statistics for year 2019, which has actually been a pretty good slow year for us. This is the year that got us that safest city in Wyoming with all of our classes of crime being really low. So the number there, the 15,296, that is the number of radio calls we have in our system for that year. So we did 15,296 things we were either called to or we found and talked to dispatch about. It doesn't necessarily count things that we would do without talking over the radio about. Of those, that next number, 10,371, that's the number of radio calls we got. So those are calls for service that came through. Things that a citizen, city council member, possibly through a council action request, have asked us to go do something. 10,371 times that year. The 4,925 are things that officers found to do on their own. So whether that's a traffic stop, whether that's nuisance enforcement, any of the many different things we do, that was officer self-initiated calls. Okay, just kind of break this down further. And the reason I do this, just because I think a lot of times the public in general, at least, has no idea what the police department does. They call, they know what they've asked for the few times in their life they've had contact with us, but they don't really see the bigger picture. So out of all those 15,000 plus calls, 178 of those were crimes against persons. So this would be an assault, a sexual assault, any type of thing where you have an actual person who was a victim of that crime. So obviously those are things that take up a lot of time when we have those. So those 178 calls, could take anywhere from a simple domestic call might tie up an officer for, maybe an hour on a very simple one without an arrest. And then up to, I believe this year we did have the one attempted murder that probably took 3 officers 4 weeks worth of work by the time it was all said and done, between court appearances and everything after that, chasing things down after the fact. So those are, even though the numbers are not great, those are very time consuming. Crimes against property, a little less time consuming. Those could be maybe something as simple as shoplifting. The more prevalent one we have is burglaries from autos, where somebody gets into an unlocked car and takes change or takes a gun or takes whatever other property that's in there. So those again range in time, how much time they take up, but still take up a fair amount of time. That 8,690 is kind of the crime prevention / service / other non-criminal activity things that we're called for. We got a long list of what these things can be. I'll just rattle through a few of them really fast. Property watch, alarm calls, doing bar checks, civil problems and citizens assist. Those are actually about 400 of those a year, just of people who want the police to solve a problem that police can't solve for them. Some of the other bigger categories, just field contacts, somebody being out, being suspicious that we stop and just have a chat with. 32 missing person cases that year. Again, something that doesn't show up in crime statistics, but takes sometimes an awful lot of time to sort out. 69 suicidal subjects that year. Just definitely a lot of different things. An unattended death call or a deceased person who dies in their home with no known reason appears medical, probably still something that takes one or two officers at the minimum of two full work days to sort through. Sometimes can take much longer than that. Traffic safety activities. This is anything from responding to traffic accidents to doing traffic stops to doing traffic control type of things, not including our crossing guards. 1,758 of those. And then the topic of tonight, animal and nuisance. So, and actually just nuisance part of that. So the 2,475 is everything that's taken care of by our community service officer group. So that's animal control officers and nuisance officer. They're all one team. One supervisor runs the whole team. They can shift back and forth if they need to help one another out. So out of those 2,475 of those that section handled, we got around 330 of them that were either nuisance or parking related. So our community service officer who does the nuisance part also helps us out with the parking. So 5-day parking, abandoned vehicles, those types of things. Okay, out of those, on all the nuisances, out of those 92 nuisances that she handled for 2019, 49 of those are ones that she self-initiated. So she was cruising by, saw a property that jumps out as, wow, that's worse than most of the neighborhood, decides to act on it. 40 of the rest of those would have been ones that a citizen called for. So out of all of 2019, we probably had 43 citizen complaints about nuisance, specific. Parking, obviously we had more parking complaints from the citizens and less self-initiated parking. Parking is one of those things that we're doing mostly on a per-call basis, especially like the 5-day parking with thousands of cars moving around town. How many have been sitting, how long in any one given neighborhood's tougher to sort out. So it's easier for us, more efficient for us, to let the neighbors call if that's bothering them, and then we take care of it. It's kind of the approach we've been taking. So that's why there's that big difference between the number reported by citizens and the number we take action on our own. So the person who's handling these two things, she's part-time, can work a maximum of 28 hours per week, because if she works more than that, then we have to provide benefits through the Affordable Care Act. 9 of those hours she spends running the work restitution crew. So she has the kids out for 8 hours a week, and then about a half an hour at the beginning and end of that is to do paperwork, tie up things, communicate with the court, that type of stuff. The other 19 hours she's working in either nuisance or parking. The teamwork that we built in the last 2 years with having her as part of animal control has actually been really beneficial too, because we had a point during the spring where we had both of our full-time animal control officers out for 2 weeks. One had just had surgery, and then one had gotten quarantined because their daughter had a medical issue. So out of those two, we only have 2 part-time animal control officers. So we had 3 part-time people to run what would normally be a 2 full-time person week, plus the weekends that they normally cover. So there's a lot of give and take that goes back and forth in that. So jumping back and narrowing down more on the topic for tonight is nuisances. So I don't know exactly where the county nuisance information came from, but okay, so Councilman Zimmerman, thanks for providing that. I provided what our current city ordinance is. For the police department, we can only enforce the city ordinance and the state statute, of course. But it's good to have comparison for what the county would be able to do. So, to save you some reading down there, these are the topics that are covered under the current city ordinances. Weeds 12 inches high. A weed's defined as anything other than shrubbery and trees. Grasses is part of what could be a weed. And that gets a little confusing. We can talk about that a little bit later if you want to. The old definition we had up until the last revision of that ordinance, the definition was noxious weeds. So you actually had a state policy on what a noxious weed is that you could actually rely on. Confused citizens like crazy, but it actually gave us a legal standard. We tried to clarify it for the citizens, but in so doing, we can have some room for arguments there on what is and isn't a weed. View or passage obstructions is the next section. That would include blocking pedestrian traffic on a sidewalk, blocking a roadway, blocking the view of signs, and then the sight triangle issue where when you're at an intersection, the height of the fence or the hedge or the wall or whatever on the property on that corner, whether or not you can see around that to enter traffic. What we define that as in our Section 17 ordinance is you measure back 28 feet from the intersection of the curb lines, and then you join those two points at, and then that's your sight triangle. So I'll just use the podium here. This is a curb line, this is a curb line. They intersect out here. You measure back 28 feet, and anything that cuts this corner would have to be under 40 inches tall under our current ordinance. Okay. And that is from the height of the sidewalk. So that's something to bear in mind too when you are talking about some intersections like the one we have here on First East and Flaming Gorge. The sidewalk is already 4 feet above the Flaming Gorge roadway. So you get 40 inches on top of that 4 feet. So it can, on certain intersections, it can cause problems. Junk. There's a long list of what is considered junk in there. Basically, it's things that can't be used as if they were new. It's kind of the shorter wording that's in there that you can kind of run by. So, and then there's very specific things listed in there too. Trash also has a definition. Trash is a little bit easier to define than junk. Trash is refuse, something that was used for something else, and then it's thrown away. You never have a use for it, so that's a lot easier to deal with those. Loud noises included in the nuisance ordinance. We generally, as a department, rely on the disturbing the peace ordinance, which is in section 18 to deal with loud noises. Either way, it's about the same. Odors, we get those from time to time. Steve was just telling me he had to call one time in the past because of a neighbor's elk head that sat there all winter long and then got ripe in the springtime. So those types of things, animal feces is probably the biggest odor complaint that we have. Somebody just not cleaning up after their animals. Animal control generally handles those. Liquid discharge, anything foul that we don't want running down into our storm gutters, we can address under the nuisance ordinance. Water pollution in general as well. Stagnant water is listed on there. I think that would be I don't know that we've ever had a case on that, and I think that would be an awful difficult one to prove with all of the ponds that we cherish so much throughout our community being stagnant pools of water. So could be one very difficult to enforce. Smoke is in there. It's got a very strict definition of what constitutes nuisance smoke. It says it's got to be a greater than 20% opacity, or you can blocks 20% of seeing through it, and it has to be that way for 6 minutes or more before it would be considered a nuisance under our definition. I don't know that we've ever had a case on that. Don't know that we'd ever be able to prove a case on that. But it is something we would talk to somebody about if we had a complaint. Dilapidated fences is in there with no real definition as to what dilapidated means. Does it mean not painted? Does it mean fallen down? We generally tend to rely on the falling down, broken parts, pieces missing kind of thing before we address it. Blowing dirt, most of the time if we get calls like that, it's from construction. And it's normally very easy to talk, sort out. We just talk to the person doing the construction and say, hey, get a water truck out here, and they do. And so we do have a number of those, especially in the summertime. And then nuisance vehicles are vehicles, in this case, parked on private property that are broke down, not registered. And there's some gray areas in there too, but Normally fairly straightforward as far as dealing with those. So that's all of the things we could be talking about, all of the things we could be focusing on as a city or as a department. And I guess I would definitely appreciate any feedback you have as to which of these are important to you guys on a officer initiated, we're going out trying to find this type of situation versus a wait until somebody calls us actually bothering somebody before we are taking action on it. Kind of brings me to next section. That's just, there's a lot of give and take when we start talking about these issues. You know, what is a nuisance to one person is not necessarily a nuisance to others. And then what level of enforcement we want from our police department is something to be considered. So I'll talk about the discretionaries first. There's the top three, kind of things we can decide on how we're going to manage these things. So first of all is officer initiated versus calls for service. As you can tell kind of from the earlier numbers, we rely fairly heavily on someone telling us it's a problem before we're going to start addressing too far into the nuisance property issues. Just to give you an example, I've directed our community service officer, as she's going through looking for nuisance property stuff, I said, I don't expect you or want you to necessarily be out there saying, boy, that looks like a 13-inch tall weed, not an 11-inch tall weed, and initiating contact based on that. I've said, what I do want you to do is if you're going down the street and you say, wow, that house looks bad, that's a good one to be initiating some stuff on your own. Because if it stands out to you just driving down the street without being nitpicky, for lack of a better word, then obviously it's going to be bothering at least a neighbor somewhere. So that's kind of where we've been doing that right now. And certainly, you know, we have ways we could go in either more or less enforcement initiated by us. And again, council direction there is helpful. The other things that we look at is this a safety issue or is it an aesthetic issue? If we see something that fits in the nuisance ordinance and it is a safety issue, that's something that I expect us to be taking action on without any direction, regardless of whether or not we think it's nitpicky or not nitpicky, doesn't matter. Obviously, if it's a safety issue, most of us wouldn't see it as being nitpicky. It's a safety issue. So that's kind of, again, where our focus is. The more aesthetic issues get fairly gray at times, and again, whether or not we want to do that depends on where we want to be as a community and where we want to strike the balance. And the next one I list is calls versus complaints, and I listed it that way for a very specific reason. We deal with calls from citizens for service on a very regular basis, and those are very easy to deal with. We also, and you guys more often than even us, or as often as us, get what I would call a complaint, not a call, where you're just getting a very general, you guys are doing nothing, the whole town looks horrible. Those are very subjective, not very specific, not knowing exactly where the problem is. Normally, if I'm getting a complaint at the police department, I try and turn it into a call by getting a little bit more specific. Okay, what exactly is bothering you? Where exactly is it bothering you? And then that's something I can deal with. So that's kind of the squeaky wheel versus the let's work it together kind of approach, you know. If we can deal with any issue if we get a call and somebody wants to help us and what they want to be telling us what about it is bothering them. It helps us really focus our man hours that we do have to devote to this into the most efficient way to get our community working together. And now some of the challenges. First is, what is junk? You know, the old wagon wheel that's sitting in the front of your yard or is part of your fence or part of your entryway definitely fits the definition of junk in our current ordinance. Most people would not consider it junk, and to include, I believe, the judge, if we were to bring him a case and say that thing that person was saving as an antique, an old plow, an old part of a tractor, something you see on American Pickers if you ever watch the A&E channel, to some people that's very valuable. To some people it's junk. Had a good weekend with my mom. Took her around Palisades Reservoir looking at the leaves, and we were talking about one of my uncles, who, by my definition, her definition, has a lot of junk. By his definition, has a lot of treasures. So where that is, even as well as our ordinance is defined, it is very subjective and can have some challenges. Next, as far as the weeds, what is overgrowth? What is a weed incident? And what is creative landscaping, for lack of a better word? If you look at our current definition, that is a weed. It's a grass. It's over 1 foot tall. So obviously somebody's landscaping. It looks very nice. It looks a lot better than this place, which has no nuisance violations on it whatsoever. There's nothing there above 12 inches tall. There's nothing we'd be able to take action on under our current ordinance. So there is definitely, obviously, room for discretion and room for interpretation when it comes to what those definitions are. And we've tried several times over my 28 years here to make those definitions as clear as we can. But we've never found a way, and I don't have a way to propose to change the wording to make them any clearer. Some things are just subjective. If we see this, we're not going to be taking action. If we see this, we're not going to be taking any action. One, because of the definition, it just doesn't fit, and the other because even though the definition fits, it's obviously the spirit of the ordinance is not addressing that. That's something we really hate in law enforcement, by the way. We really want laws to be very clear. But when we're talking about these issues that have so many opinions and so many different variations, that's a very difficult thing to achieve. Private property versus city property. In general, this is not too big of a challenge for us because most of the time all of the time we work very well department to department. If we have a nuisance problem in one area and it happens to be right next to a city property that just hasn't got the weed crew hasn't got to it yet, but I need to take care of the citizens' property, I can call Parks or wastewater, whoever's in charge of the weeds in that property, and let them know, and they go out and they take care of it. And then that way we can tell the citizen, look, here, we did take care of ours, now please take care of yours. And it's very effective. One area that Brad covered during our last workshop that creates a huge problem here is the right-of-ways, and specifically the planting strips. So as we learned from our last meeting, those basically have been treated as city property. Our insurance carrier, when we have a tree issue, told us it was our tree to take care of. If you go up and down Flaming Gorge Way, there's those planting strips all up and down there that the city maintains, they mow, they take care of the trees on. But then you get a side street, that exact same type of property, that same strip, we're not maintaining because we don't have the funds to be everywhere. So if weeds grow on that, we would like the homeowner to take care of them. But currently, we don't have any language that says that's the homeowner's responsibility. So that does fall to us if we do run into that. There's a whole bunch of weeds on the planting strip in front of my house. I'll cut my grass, but you guys got to take care of that. Currently, we are taking care of that as a city. It's one of those things where, it takes a call between department heads to figure out who's going to take care of it. But there's no way to, under our current wording, there's no way to put that on the homeowner to make them take care of it. We can talk to them about it, talk to them about being good neighbors, how we're all in this together, and sometimes they will. And we do sell that as best we can, but that's not something we can force under current statutes or ordinances. Next one, you all would hear about, depending on what action we're taking. You'll hear from some citizens saying, you guys got to take care of this. It's our community. It needs to look the way it should look in my view. And then we'll have that person who owns that property that they're complaining about saying, well, it's my property. I own it. I have a right to do with it as I choose. That's what makes this tough. It really does. And then down at the bottom, this is another one that we're successful in dealing with, though it comes up very often. You have people who just don't desire to comply, and then you have people who don't have the ability to comply. So, generally if it's a young married couple with one child and all the energy in the world, good health, it's, well, sorry, you're going to have to take care of it. But quite often when we're knocking on the door, it's somebody who's a single mom working a job trying to raise kids by herself, or an elderly couple where one person's having bad health problems and any of a number of reasons why they haven't been able to get around to taking care of their weeds or something. And generally we try to work with those folks, give them time, give them suggestions, try to call around. When we were talking in the last meeting about community effort and coming together as a community, this would be something I think would be great if we did have some form of civic group that wants to go out and help and make and beautify Green River. This would be a perfect time that we'd be able to call them and say, hey, this couple's having a very difficult time right now and they could use some help. We do that, but on an informal basis right now. So that's kind of the food for thought I put together to throw out there. And I'll turn it over to you for questions or discussion.
Anybody have any? Certainly there's a lot of issues that you've raised in clarification. I think we'll be talking about these, but we appreciate that. We'll hear from whoever else is going to speak, and then we'll, I think, have a discussion. If that sounds okay?
That works.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor, Council, Ken Yeager, Senior Building Inspector, here at the City of Green River. The code enforcement encompasses many different codes within our city. We have the zoning code. We have property maintenance code, which we've adopted, which that encompasses many things, including pretty well everything that Chief Jarvis went over. We have the building codes, fire codes. Some things to realize, property maintenance code was adopted in its entirety. I think the only thing they took out of it was insect screens on windows of houses. That property maintenance code covers things such as anything on the exterior of the house, say the paint, the shingles are starting to get dilapidated. Those are things we can enforce by the property maintenance code. However, some of them might get a little overboard on the fact of the property freedom versus community need. We have areas of that code that tells you your concrete sidewalks have to be free of hazards and in good working order, basically can't be dilapidated or can't be falling apart. Driveways, patios, stairs, the patios have to be waterproofed and whatnot. We have had conversations on enforcement of property maintenance, building codes, zoning violations, stuff like that with the prosecutor, because I think where we come into question is if we take a stance on it and talk to somebody, we want to be able to follow up with that. If they just say, oh, he sent me a letter, I'm not going to do anything with it, we have to have somewhere to go with that, and we have to have some backing from several different departments as well. Like I say, I've talked to the city prosecuting attorney just to see where that would go, which obviously we want voluntary compliance. That's our number one goal. we don't want to have to take it any farther, but we want to know what our standard operating procedure is to go forward that way. So that's what we're trying to get in place with the building department, zoning department, basically development services. We want to have something in place to know what the next step is, and we're working on those things. The one thing that we would like to know, probably from the council's viewpoint, is what those priority enforcement issues you'd like to see are. So obviously zoning has issues with fences. The site triangle, that was an interesting deal. I went out on one that it looks like the site triangle would be completely encroached with the tree. When we measured it out, it was only encroaching by about a foot. Most of those site triangles are just on the backside of the street signs. So that 28 foot is kind of a one size fits all. And like Chief Jarvie said, there's places here that the sidewalk's already 4 foot tall. You put 40 inches on top of a hill, you're not going to be able to see around the corner. So with us being a hill, that 28 foot, maybe it needs reworked a little bit. Chief Jarvie covered a number of the things. Everything in the nuisance ordinance is out of the property code. I don't know if when they designed that, they took it out of there and kind of took the priority pieces out of the property code, property maintenance code. The property maintenance code, like I say, it goes into things that I think we'd have 10 employees full-time for 2 years to take care of everything that was in that code. And I don't think that's the intent of what you as a council or mayor are looking for tonight. But that's something to keep in mind. We have a lot of different maintenance codes that we've adopted here that we can enforce. We just kind of need some direction of what you're wanting, what you're seeing that the major problems are.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Because I have a slide for what Ken was talking about on the site triangles. That corner right there, just because of the layout, the site triangle on that doesn't cover the sidewalk. So you could put a 12-foot high fence all the way up to the sidewalk on that corner legally. There's another place just 6 blocks up, and I can't remember. I believe a council person brought it up to me before. It's on Hackberry where it meets Riverview. It's got a hedge that's about 48 inches. You could probably have them knock it about 8 inches off of it because it is within the site triangle. But if you tried to extend it more than 28 feet, you'd be going way back onto their property as far as how far back you cut in the hedge. So 28 feet works great on that property. Here, it doesn't even make it to the sidewalk. So, again, what we're trying to solve is not always very easy.
Leave that slide up, okay? Okay. Okay, we can just go down the line here. We'll start with the ladies first.
Yeah, is
Councilor
there?
Kilpack hadn't raised his hand, so.
Oh, he will. He's been writing over there.
Okay.
I know when I went to plant trees and I had a sidewalk that did have a planting area that I called first and had someone come over and show me how to go back and see where the tree needed to be planted. And I think that some of this is a little bit of education with the citizens, and so they know that there's a site triangle there and you have to go back because there are some corners. This one down here, just right off City Hall, is you almost have to get out in the street to see if somebody's coming. I mean, there used to be a stoplight there. It was great. It went off the minute you went down there, and next thing we know, it's gone. But, and there's a sculpture and some ornamental grass there. But you can't see around that corner. You have to just edge and edge and edge, and then kind of, you're almost out in the street before you can see what's going on. But I think maybe an education of the citizens is good. And what are we designating some streets 4 city trees because we have trees on Riverview. We have trees on Second South. Second North used to be a main thoroughfare. We used to take care of those trees, but are we going to send letters out to the citizens once we decide and just tell them, hey, you're responsible for your trees, or how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Part of the reason why, or part of the policy that's been in the past, is what Brad covered during last meeting, is that it was done by an administrative procedure. It wasn't a law, it wasn't an ordinance, it wasn't anything legally binding on anybody. So a lot of those planter strips were planted based on that and maintained based on that. Now, how we go back from there is going to be a question for Galen. I'm not so sure I'm not so sure what the legal path forward to make somebody responsible for that at this point would be. Don't know if it's possible, or if it is possible, how it would happen.
Yeah, I got some thoughts on that, but we'll get to the answer to
Got
that.
one
Go
more
ahead,
question.
Lisa.
And this thing about this stoplight down here, when the tunnels are closed and the traffic is coming through Green River via the semis and everything else, that light was the only way you could stop the traffic. If you could get to that light, you could make them stop so you can get across the street. Now, you've only got the one stoplight down there. So when we close the tunnels, they're just, I don't know how anybody's going to get across the street, unless you do the right-hand turn. I don't know why that was taken out.
It was taken out by, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chief, go ahead.
It was YDOT who removed that. It is a state highway through there, and they have traffic light warrants that Mark can speak to a little bit more in depth than I can. But basically, they have statistics that show them when it does more harm than good to have a light there, and that's where at the point that intersection reached. Actually, years before they decided to finally move it after it was taken out by a vehicle to make removing it easier.
Well, you know what I'm talking about. When that tunnel shuts down and those trucks start to come through, they're moving.
Right turns are the only
Yeah.
thing to do when that happens. And whether it's that intersection or any other of the uncontrolled intersection along Flaming Gorge, when highway traffic's coming through town, you better plan on making a right turn, a left turn, and another right turn to get left.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost impossible. That's how I used to stop the trucks, so I can get across the street. But anyway, and then citizens, I think, need to know that they have to call in if there's a nuisance, and turn those things in. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Councilman Shuttrin?
As far as what we need to address first, I think we probably need to identify anything that's a safety concern first. Start with the safety issues and make a list, and then prioritize. I mean, if we were to look at that, it's like eating an elephant. You're going to have to do it one bite at a time. There's just not too much to address all at one time, for sure. I think we can all think of instances where you've got blind corners or nuisance things for travel on sidewalks or things that are pet peeves. So.
Councilman Zimmerman?
Thank you. I think these are very similar to the counties, just a little bit here and there, but I don't think it really correlates. The county's a different animal. Just what I wanted to say on the side triangle. What we do is we have different in the county. We have different grades of road. We have the local, we have the collector, and the arterial. Thank you. And so as you get onto those streets that have a higher speed limit, the setback is deeper. So that's the way we do it on there. But just as a general statement, I think that, I handle a lot of this in the county. And boy, when you have to you're judging whether or not it's a nuisance or not, it's really tough. It is really tough. And in Wyoming, it's it's what I hear all the time, it's my land, I can do with it what I want. And the other one I hear is, well, why are you picking on me? What about the guy down the street? So our commissioners have made my job a little bit easier by saying that it's only complaint driven. So, and that's another thing maybe we can't do in the city. But what that does is they're saying if the neighbors can put up with what's going on your property, we shouldn't really get in there and change anything. So that's really helped my issues. But as far as the county, we base everything on public health or safety. So with us, nothing is aesthetic. So in other words, we don't have a 12-inch weed. We have overgrown weeds that would cause fire danger. So we have the fire code in the county, and so we come back to the fire code. Like Ken was saying, we have other codes we use. So whatever code fits, but it's all based on public safety and public health and safety. And so it takes away some of the, you didn't paint this or you didn't paint that, So it comes down to, and I know that's a little easier in the county, but, a lot of our, when we do, do things like permitting, and, they say, well, I didn't think we needed to do that in the county. That's why I moved out of the city. So I get a lot of that too. So I know the rules are different, but I think our nuisances are similar. I think personally, where we should start is some of these properties. Mayor and I did talk a little bit about this, but some of these properties have gotten to the point where they've slipped and they're not zoned to be doing what they're doing. And when you can get into planning and zoning and find out what they're allowed to do as far as by permit, what they're permitted to do, it seems like they've slipped and slipped and slipped, and they're doing things on these properties that you wouldn't allow in a city. And that really is a blight, especially down along the river and along the main arteries in the city. I mean, we're trying to be a tourist town, and we're trying to get people to come to Green River. And, those are some of the areas that I think are the major starts where we need to beautify the city. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Councilman Zimmerman. Since we're going down the line, I'm going to give my opinion, and then I'll let you talk, Chief, okay? Because I'm one of the ones that initiated this in terms of just a particular view of what's going on in the community. And I think that where we need to start is traffic safety period. And what that goes with is it's fairly simple in a sense, and it does address, one of your things, Chief, one of your slides, calls versus complaints. The same thing Councilman Zimmerman just said. The county only is complaint driven. I don't agree with that, in the sense that if it's a safety issue, it doesn't matter whether it's complaint driven or not. The safety and it's traffic and pedestrian safety, essentially, that what we're talking about. And the reason why this comes up at this time, as far as the nuisance and an aspect of the nuisance law, and that is the safety issue, is it works out perfectly as we've had the storm of the century, and we've had a lot of cleanup, both by nature and by citizens, in terms of hazards, plain and simple traffic hazards. And I can give you an example that everybody knows about. When you're coming up Monroe, and you pass Veterans Field, and there's a trailer court on the right-hand side, and the trees that are Russian olives historically came through the trees onto the sidewalk, and you have to walk almost into the street when you go by there. Well, because of some branches all along, somebody, presumably in the trailer court, because they're the ones that are responsible and not the people that are renting that have the trailers there, has gone through and cleaned up that whole area. Now you can walk down the sidewalk and be safe. And I'll give you another example, the opposite, on, what's the street that we were talking about with that one branch? Is that Hitching? That's not Hitching Post. But anyway, there's a street. There's a branch that hangs out over the person's fence. It's in a very visible, very high traffic area, on the way to it's right, kind of just down from the Catholic Church. So that's the street, whatever that street is, that main street. Hitching Post? It is Hitching Post. Yeah, and there just happens to be this significant branch that comes over the sidewalk, been there 3 weeks in the storm, and however long that is, 2 weeks, whatever. And essentially, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, kids that walk to school on that, and the person hasn't cleaned it up. Now, how can that be? And quite frankly, how can all of us allow that to have happened and continue to exist? Like Mike said, he wanted to stop by and cut it off. I know I wanted to stop by. It's somebody's private property, that sort of thing. But I think in terms of my particular view of a starting point, just my particular view, and then I'll move it on to the next person. I think that what we need to do is we need to do an inventory of safety issues within the community that involve sight triangles and that involve safety vision problems in terms of people have to, because it's not just sight triangles. There's, in fact, I asked, I'm not sure if this is a good example, but the trees all the way down at the end, if it's not an example, it looks like they're extending out into the street. That's probably not a good example. But there are clearly sidewalks, I know in my neighborhood, in which the trees come down to 5 feet. They hang over the sidewalk 5 feet. You cannot walk down the sidewalk. First off, that's a disgrace. Secondly, it clearly is a safety hazard because you cannot use the sidewalk. You have to walk in the street. You can't walk. And there are a number of those. The one that Lisa mentioned, I talk about all the time right here. I know coming from my father-in-law's every day, there's one in which there's a tree on the corner, and then 15 feet down in the front yard, there's a tree that's right at the front, and you cannot see down the street. I think that we should do an inventory, and I think that inventory would involve partially an education in the sense that, not an education, an involvement of the citizens, of the city staff that are out all the time, and if you did an email and said, hey, Public Works, all the different people, streets, while you're out and about, if you know of an area that you see where trees or other hazards exist on sidewalks in which it affects the pedestrian having to walk into the streets, or on corner lots, which is a major thing in terms of the clear vision area, that you bring it to the attention and we create this inventory. I think the governing body, through people that call us, and as we're kind of more aware of these areas, it's exactly what you said, every one of us could create a list right now. And together we could clearly create a list and just add to it. And then I think the traffic committee, so citizens, city staff, the governing body, the traffic committee, and quite frankly, I don't know who else, but I'm sure you guys do, kind of a thing. And if we had that inventory, and if we started there in terms of nuisance enforcement, as you pointed out, Chief, it's a hugely broad area, but I think if we started with traffic safety, I think that's one that is acceptable to the public for the most part. It's justifiable in terms of our obligations that we should be looking at first, safety. And then I think once you do that and you have that inventory, then you begin the first then you do what Councilman Zimmerman says, and what you've talked about is you look at the regulations. and try to make them something that's workable that you do, and then you do what Lisa said, and you do the education to the people in terms of try to get which you've also talked about, voluntary compliance. I think if we went that route, just with this one narrow area of nuisance at a time in which we've got a place to take the trees and work on the trees, and we have this vision in our community, and that people are taking a lot of pride in, that we have done an excellent job of working together to fix hazards within the community. And I just think it's the ideal time to do it. And I think if we started there, that would be a perfect beginning to look into some other things. Then we deal with whatever the next safety issue is, which can, and I'll just give you an example and then I'll shut up. Councilman Shutter and I were talking in terms of, and this is typical, and all you guys know this, during hunting season, it's not uncommon to find tip-outs in vehicles that are parked along the road. And it's not a lot, but it's a huge safety issue, both for the person that has the particular piece of property, the person that could be sleeping in that tip-out, and people that are driving by, because, and I could tell you a couple of the examples, and you guys would know them, because you drive past Smith's, and then you drive up the road, and there's one parked on the right-hand side as you're heading towards, I don't know, whatever, the intersection of Upland and Bridge, no, it's not Hitching Post. Teton, the intersection of, there's a place that, quite often there's a trailer during certain times of the year with the tip out. You have to go into the other driving lane to go by. You have to do that. So I think all I'm saying is I think once we take care of one aspect, I think then we move to a safety aspect, then you consider aesthetic types of things, which is a completely different, much more controversial, much more anti-Wyoming freedom of property, which, by the way, has never existed since the dawn of time. There's never been an absolute right to use your property however you choose. There's always been restrictions on property rights back to the Egyptian times, but we won't get into that. Anyway, I really think safety and trees and that whole thing and is a perfect opportunity to do it. And I think we have the ability right now. I think we have the community sensitized to it. And I think that we have, as a practical matter, we have a way to take care of it really easy. And we have half the community with new chainsaws that are more than willing to go cut down anybody's tree just because it's kind of fun. So that's my 2 cents. Go ahead, Chief, and then we'll let the two councilmen in the front speak.
Can I add something just quick?
Sure.
In the county, one of my greatest assets on Sun Triangle is the bus drivers.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Perfect.
We talk
Perfect.
with them, they come in, they tell us the intersections that they cannot see.
That,
Excellent resource.
that is an excellent one. And another one that just occurs to me, because I saw the poor person, making that really sharp turn and driving up off of where I live on Hitching Post, and driving up to the houses up on the side of the hill up the dirt road, and that was the delivery trucks that are everywhere now in the form of FedEx and those kinds of, those are another ones that they drive all the time. I guarantee you they know where the hazards are. Waste management is another one. Yeah, I really do think we could get a good inventory. And then we explore that as through the traffic committee or through a volunteer committee of citizens. I'd be happy to volunteer, and you break it down and get some priorities set based on some standards. This is a high traffic volume area. There's kids in the area. There's schools in the area. Number one priority. This is an area, those kinds of things. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, it's just from when Councilman Zimmerman was talking, it's kind of way he was describing how they're doing it in the county is very similar. Though the safety thing always has been our focus, and I think that is a great focus, and I think that's something that's very easy for us to do when we do have a strong safety argument for what we're doing and a law to back it up. Then it works really well. When we just have one of those, which is sometimes the case, that can be a little more difficult. I know that one thing I'm sure probably annoys everybody on council is a dead pine tree that lasted the windstorm. You know, there is a part in ordinance that talks about safety. You know, if there is a condition of property that is unsafe, without definition other than it is unsafe, then we can tell them they have to abate it. But that gets, that tree is a perfect example of how arbitrary that can be. To me, a dead tree standing there is pretty unsafe. It's one of the only ones that made it through the windstorm, so I guess I lost my unsafe argument for why that tree would have to be cut down.
But that's a good example of maybe the second tier of because the first ones, I think after you identify some of the criteria, again, I think school zones, things of that nature, I think that priority, I think, is there are some that are fairly easy and fairly clear. Then there's ones that are less, and you move on to those. Okay, so just for the sake of time, go ahead, Councilman Berg.
Thank you very much for your presentation tonight. I think you did a great job putting that together, and what you're doing, for the most part, sounds like it's working. So, listening to council and everybody that spoke so far, it sounds like obviously priority number one is safety, and then priority two would be the calls and complaints that you do get, and the way you're handling it sounds like it works 90% of the time. And then third definitely being aesthetics of the city as a whole. And when we start talking about aesthetics of the city as a whole, one of the enforcement things that we do have that we do not ever use is the urban renewal agency. And if you've got a property that is really dilapidated and has a lot of problems, there is always that word that nobody likes to use, but slum and blight can be used as far as enforcement to get a property owner to either clean it up or action can be taken. So that's something that was put together 10, 12 years ago that we never considered, but it is there for a property that has an absentee owner that just doesn't do anything with it. And usually in the times that letters have been sent out and that term has been used that this property is looking really bad, the owner usually steps up and gets that cleaned up. So there's that enforcement tool too. Rather than rewriting the ordinance from scratch, any of the department heads, if any of you have a problem that comes about that isn't enforceable, then that's when I think we'd want to make the changes to the ordinance, is when you guys come to us with, hey, can we change this in the ordinance so that it is enforceable? So that's my thoughts.
Very good. Thank you, Councilman Murphy.
I do know for one of the biggest things is if you want to get back at a neighbor, you call up and say their yard looks like garbage. They've got cars parked there. I've known people that have had cars parked in front of their houses for 3-4 months. Nobody's ever said anything because they get along with their neighbors. If you want to have a problem, you just call it in on your neighbor. Police come out. All of a sudden you have something fixed or whatever, possibly. I had a constituent say, hey, the neighbor around the corner's house looks like crap. I went up there and mowed his yard so he didn't have to. He was an older gentleman, had a lot of problems. I went up and took care of it. As I was coming in tonight, there was a tree limb across the road right here on the side of City Hall. I realize, the city has, a lot of people in the city have come together. I'd love somebody to come over to my backyard and take out a couple trees I've got falling down, because it's going to take a crane to get them out. So there's no way I'm going to climb up a ladder 30, 40 feet to try to tie onto them to let them back down. But there is, like I said, if you want to get back at someone, you just call up and say it's a nuisance. And then I went around looking at some different places. I'm not sure if the city owns it, but there by PMS screen printing against the fence, the weeds are 3-4 feet tall. I do know going over by the dog pound, there's weeds all over out there, and over there by the horse corrals. So the biggest problem is you go up to someone's house and say, okay, Billy Bob, you've got 3-foot tall weeds, and he goes and says, well, guess what, Mayor? Or Rob or whoever else, you've got 3-foot tall weeds in your city park. What's the difference? Who's gonna take care of it? The city can't take care of theirs? Why should I have to take care of mine? You know, I had a guy call me up and say, my grass is here, my sidewalk is here, I've got 18 inches of empty space here, and then the road. What am I supposed to do with it? I went and talked to Mark, and he says, I can tell you this much, and say he doesn't have anything to do with it. He can do whatever he wants to, and I told him you can put decorative rock, you can put brick in, whatever you want to, whatever you want to make look nice, so it's not a hazard to people walking down the sidewalk or going down the road. You're more than welcome to. I said, but don't expect the city to come in and say, oh, we're gonna cement that in for you. Or we're gonna put grass in there and keep it watered for you, or anything else. And that's a big problem we've got, is, I talked to another guy that's over by R&B Meats, he goes, my sidewalk's here, you've got 4 feet of trees in that. I've taken care of it, my neighbors have, but 3 houses down, they said, no, that's the city's, they can take care of it, it looks like garbage. What do you do? So that's all I can say.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Murphy. I just want to make a quick comment on that, and that is that I think it's a good point that the city should always step forward and do their thing first, because you are going to get that, and we do represent the whole group, so that we have that kind of a responsibility. However, it's the same thing. If you do an inventory and you have good criteria that you establish, these are the most important safety issues. It doesn't matter whether it's the city's property or private property. It needs to be taken care of, and the private property doesn't hold any special status in those particular situations in terms of safety issues. That would be my only comment. Councilman Kilpack.
I don't have a whole lot to add, other than I agree with everything what everybody has said, most part. I would like, in my opinion, I'd like to see, of course this is just me thinking, and maybe the council agrees or disagrees with me. You're out facing the public every day way more than I am. And so is the Jaeger with the building department. They're out facing the problem way more than we are. I would like to see what your list is, what you feel is most important to address first, and then address second, and then third, and see, because you know what the problems are more than I do. And I'm not saying that the council doesn't know what all the problems are, but you're on the front line, and we're not on the front line. To a degree, we do get phone calls from citizens, and they have complaints and concerns. And I do feel that the one issue that you talked about on the site, what did you call that, site triangle? That is an issue throughout the community, because like you showed on the picture there, some areas, even a 8-foot site triangle is sufficient depending on the way the road is. And some of them have to be 40-foot depending on how the road is. So I do think that is an issue of safety, which I think safety is number one. And so I think that is important. And just in support of my argument on that, as far as safety goes, I think we have a street in town where we need to put a 3-way stop. And that 3-way stop, I feel, should be on Monroe and Hitching Post at the bottom, right by the bottom of the football field. I would like to see a 3-way stop there, or a roundabout. To put a roundabout in there would be difficult, because then we'd have to work with the school district, and because it takes property. But there has been some accidents down there, and one of the worst ones we had in the last couple of years was the gentleman that was driving too fast or intoxicated. I don't know the whole story, and he ran into the house and killed an individual. So that's just one thing that I'm thinking about. And I, when it comes to nuisances and trying to go around and tell people to fix their yards or to clean things up, sometimes people just don't have the money to do it. And so I think that needs to be a concern. And yes, not most, but a lot of the times, it just takes a little bit of muscle to clean it up. And so those type of things are okay, but I think we need to be really careful in blight buildings. And we also have an organization in the community that is part of their assignment, if I understand it right. And I don't think they've done anything in regards to blight buildings, and that's the URA. That is part of their responsibility to look at buildings that are blight buildings, and that is part of the things that they should be doing, is going out and working on the blight buildings. And I don't know if they've done much on that. I haven't seen much, but that is one of the responsibilities of that area. But I do agree with everybody else that safety, I do really think safety should be a high priority, especially if it's me that gets hit and killed.
So Chief and Ken, well, go ahead, Councilman Burt.
Mayor, could I address as
Sure,
far as
sure.
Kilpack's question on that? The URA does have a list of buildings that they would look at and consider, but they have always wanted to wait for council direction on that. So there are properties out there that they have identified.
But as I understand it, I was involved with the URA when they first started it. They don't have to wait for council's permission.
They do not. But it's just like what Chief Jarvie is saying, you know, they're not gonna go out and nitpick each and everything. They're gonna wait for a complaint to come in order to address it. So the URA Main Street, they would always entertain a suggestion from council on slum and blight properties.
And you know what he said is really good. And that's part of the problem we have is nuisance. And I think Tom said a little bit about this too, is we all want to be good neighbors. And am I going to turn my neighbor in and have my neighbor hate me because his property is a blight property or a dirty property or weeds are 18 foot high? It's just a tough situation.
And that's why we shouldn't start with that. and maybe not even get to it. You know, I mean, that's a whole nother, much different issue than traffic safety, because trees and other whatever obstructions are preventing people from able to see or walk in a safe area. That is a very safe area to deal with, and again, it's our obligation. And I do think a very important point that a couple of people have brought up is we should have a group formed in the whole process as we do the inventory and all that are willing to go out and help the people that can't help themselves, because there are those people. I would only caution you that I did this once at the senior center after my coffee with the seniors, and I got there to mow the lady's lawn, and her son, who's 25 years old, is sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, and I just wanted to, and I did not mow the lawn.
What we try to do is help those who can help themselves.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people that need help in all kinds of various ways, and to the extent that you're doing that, it does make it a legitimate community effort, and you don't get into the kinds of things that Tom's talking about, that because it absolutely will always come up is you've got to clean yours up first, city, before I clean mine up. But again, that doesn't apply to safety. Go ahead, Lisa.
And I just wanted to add one more thing on the storm and the trees that are down and things like that, because I still have an elm tree, and you know, it's my neighbor's elm tree, and they're a young couple. They have little kids, and they're trying to figure out what to do. But I know people that are waiting for estimates from insurance companies, and there's so many out there that it's taken a long time. And so they're having to wait a little bit to get those estimates and stuff before they can address the trees. But I know I've got like 2 great big branches and I called my neighbors and told them, hey, you know, whatever you guys do, you know, I'm willing to help pay, even though it's not my tree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I think they would have a difficult time paying for it. You know, but I look at it and I think, oh, you know, I told the neighbor, I said, don't climb up there. don't even touch that thing because the branches are so big. You know, I don't want them to get hurt. But there's a lot of people out there, I think, that are waiting to get estimates and trying to figure out what to do. you know?
And the only point I would make, Lisa, is in terms of what we're talking about here, this is not storm damage stuff that we're talking about. We're talking about ongoing situations in which people have not taken the responsibility in some cases and didn't have the ability in some cases. But in either case, a safety issue exists, and the only thing, the reason why I said the council, and you came up right away with an example that was one that you've seen, Gary, and I know exactly the situation that you're talking about, is the more people that give their input into the process. I love Councilman Zimmerman's thing about bus drivers, because there's 35 routes that go out every day all over the city. Those people cover the whole, I guarantee you they know, you know, they're going to come up with some. So I think as a community-wide effort to come up with the inventory, and then you kind of go out and evaluate each site based on some criteria. We're going to have a work program available that's going to identify the worst safety issues in the city, and that's going to be something that for the most part is going to be acceptable to the greatest number of citizens. It's not one where you tell on your neighbor necessarily, because it's going to, first off, the people that call in individually, that should be an anonymous type of a thing, because you're trying to do it for the benefit of the community. But will there be some abuses that the only reason that people are doing it is for the wrong reason? Sure, that's always the case, but that's not the reason to not then do it, not when you're talking safety.
We have one other thing, and I need to ask Ken this. Ken Yeager, this question is, and the chief might can answer it too, but isn't part of these nuisance issues addressed in an R1 and an R2 and an R3 and an R4? Aren't the rules and regulations different in each one of those?
Not as far as the nuisance ordinance, they wouldn't be. I think that'd be for Tom. It's not a difference. There's different setbacks and whatnot on the zoning code ordinances in different zones and what they're allowed to be used for uses. But as far as a nuisance property, no, nuisance is a nuisance in the city of Green River.
Okay, Tom, you're going to have the final word here, I think.
Just want to summarize the consensus I'm hearing and kind of let you know what my plan is. This is great timing. The weeds are going to stop growing. So I plan on directing our community service officer to start looking at site triangles and pedestrian passageways, as well as the 5-day parkings, which he normally starts focusing on when snow starts to fly. So she'll be doing that. We'll be looking for, I'm sure, help from Steve and Reed as far as getting out word to other people to please let us know about safety issues that they'd like addressed. We do have a traffic committee. We do have somebody from the school district that we've just asked to be on the traffic committee, as long as poor old Randy Koloff didn't get away from just retiring. He's going to be on the traffic committee too. So anything that we cannot address under current statute or that requires signage or something like that would go to the traffic committee for review and then brought to you if action is needed from council. Is that a consensus that I'm hearing all of the council is agreeing with?
Everybody agree with that? Good.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Tom. Good job, you guys, everybody. And I think you're going to have a little work now, too, to help, get some of these people. All right, we're adjourned.